are we on? Well, thank you very much, virtual audience, and welcome, real audience. And now you all can admire my shoes since that's what I was talking about. Anyway, we were not lucky enough to score Adam for his first book, The Ascent, because his working schedule. Were you still a beat cop at that point? Not, no, patrol cop, sorry.
I was in patrol, yeah.
You were in patrol. So you fit us in on Zoom, but you couldn't quite make it over here.
Yeah, but it's great to be here.
Well, we're delighted that you are. So, before you started writing fiction, you wrote a couple of books, nonfiction. So, tell us about those, because you have at least one person in the audience who I've scolded for not coming with questions,
All right.
who already made him self conscious, right? You can tell us about, let's see, 400 Things Cops Know, which was nominated for an Agatha Award and won a different award. The Agatha Award is really funny that your book won that, because the Agatha Award is given by a convention called Malice Domestic, and it's for historical and cozy mysteries. So it's not entirely clear to me how 400 Things Cops Know managed to win an Agatha Award.
It was nominated. It didn't win.
Oh, it
but
was
it was
nominated.
nice to be in
Even
the
so,
conversation.
yeah, that's pretty awesome.
I didn't ask too many questions. I just kind of rolled with it.
I see. And then your second book, also nonfiction, is called Policecraft. So have you become kind of a source for writers or people interested in how things actually work in policing?
Yeah, that's been one of kind of the cool things about writing is authors have come up to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about this or that? Or is this realistic? Or what would a detective do in this situation?" And I mean, it's fun to field those questions and try to be helpful. It's one of my favorite parts about being an author.
Oh, it sounds terrific. So San Francisco, I was an undergraduate at Stanford before the Vietnam War, because I'm really old. So it was a very formal city back then. I remember my mother, we were wandering around Union Square in 1957 when I was looking at it. And we were wearing tennis shoes, and she thought it would be nice if we went in for afternoon tea. And then she said we couldn't go to the St. Francis Hotel. And I said,
okay.
Why not? And she said, we're wearing tennis shoes. That's how formal San Francisco was. By the time I graduated from Stanford in 1962, Haight-Ashbury had come along, and in like 4 years, the city had completely transformed.
Yeah, it's a lot less formal now. There's actually it's kind of known for a lot of naked folks walking around.
Or sleeping on the sidewalk.
Yeah, some of that too. Fentanyl has hit the city pretty hard, but it's a fascinating town to police. It's got really sort of distinct and interesting neighborhoods. So,
well, it's
never
beautiful.
dull.
Yeah, I mean the Victorians are absolutely gorgeous. Is the Presidio still government property?
It is.
Because it's been fighting off the Presidio, which has a fabulous view of the Golden Gate Bridge, among other things, has been kind of in the developer target for, even back then, it was, because you could really do a lot building houses in the Presidio if you managed to get it away from, what is it, the Army or the Navy? It's the Army, isn't it?
I believe it's the Army. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
Right.
In San Francisco, like I live a little bit out of the city, but for instance, I took my 12-year-old daughter there, and we took a night tour of Alcatraz prison, and then had chocolates at Ghirardelli Square, and did the cable cars, and I mean the city's right there. It's pretty cool.
God, touring Alcatraz prison. When I was there, remember the guys that swam away from Alcatraz? Who were 4 of them, something like that? Were they all caught or did they all die? I can't remember. It didn't go well for them.
The case
You
is
never
still
found them?
open.
Right, but that's how Alcatraz was.
I came to
We
San
didn't
Francisco to
even-
solve it.
Oh, did
Yeah.
you? Okay, it's going to be a really cool case.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. I mean, it wouldn't have occurred to us while Prison Break was going on that we could actually take a tour of the prison.
Yeah, and the way, I don't know if anyone's seen Escape from Alcatraz, the Clint Eastwood movie, and there's
Yeah.
an earlier one too, but these prisoners used spoons to tunnel out from their wall of their cell, and then they crafted paper mache heads to fool the guards at night count, and they lashed together some sort of raft. I'm not whatever materials they had on hand. Yeah. Okay, raincoats, and then they sort of disappeared into the night, and were never found. 3 of them, I think, and I mean, presumed drowned, but we never know.
Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. It's so embarrassing if it's my phone that rings. Right. Okay, so now you've gone back to investigation, so maybe in chance you now can crack. If you thought about crowdsourcing it, this is a new thing that shows up in crime fiction too, because there's so many crime podcasters and so forth that the last John Sanford book, that's what happened to Lucas and Virgil. They were called to a cold case,
Okay.
and like 200 crime podcasters descended upon the crime scene. They're all looking for, new followers, clicks, all that kind of stuff, and a
Yeah.
$1 billion reward that somebody had posted. But I wonder, do you actually run into that, or have you gotten into investigative services enough now to have run into this kind of crowdsourcing idea for investigation?
I have not so much. I did investigations for about 3 years, sort of meat and potatoes felonies. But as of this Monday, actually just transferred to the Internet Crimes Against Children unit, which
It's going to be very hard.
seems like pretty righteous work to me. So I'm just kind of getting oriented to that, but it's just kind of going after a different kind of bad guy.
Well, I was just giving you plot suggestions. If you're stuck, you can now, you can now have crowdsourcing as a new
I'll
thing.
definitely keep that in
Right.
mind.
So Hardtown is Adams' second novel, and the first one called The Ascent. For those who don't know about The Ascent, give us a little summation.
So The Ascent is about a ex-Detroit cop. His name is Kurt Argento, and he leaves the job sort of under a cloud, and just decides to hit the road with his faithful Chow Shepherd, and he runs afoul of a corrupt local sheriff's department, and gets tossed into jail on some sort of bogus charges, and then while he's there, the governor of Missouri's daughter is taking a tour of the prison for a course that she's taken, a grad school course, and the digital security system for the prison just goes haywire. So it lets all sorts of dangerous prisoners out on every separate floor. So it's basically it's sort of like a violent obstacle course that they have to navigate to get through to safety. Runs a little dark. It's not for the squeamish, but it was a lot of fun to write.
Hence my comment about the Agatha Award.
Yeah,
I love it. I bet they didn't nominate The Ascent.
they did not.
They
no.
did not. No. Right.
And that's fair enough.
Okay. So in this book, our guy Kurt has come to a small Arizona town, which is why I got out my turquoise jewelry so I could kind of be in the mood here for
Yeah.
it. But why did you pick a small Arizona town?
Well, I've always been fascinated by the desert. I remember when I was a kid and I read this book called Death Watch by an author named Rob White. I don't know if that rings a bell with anyone, but it came out in the early to mid 70s, and it's basically a desert survival tale. And there are passages from that book that are still sort of imprinted in my brain. So just something about the desert, kind of that hard, clean look and the stillness. I thought it would be just a good setting for a novel. And since The Ascent was largely set indoors, I thought, all right, let's mix it up and, let's go outside.
Why
So-
not? So what part of Arizona? It's clearly not anywhere around Phoenix.
No, it's a small town, sort of in my mind's eye. It's kind of near the Tucson area, but it's for Howtown to sort of help craft the desert survival part of it. I actually got up with a desert survival expert
You
who
did.
was super helpful, and also a burn doctor, just to try to make those passages pretty realistic. And those folks were incredibly helpful. Like, I just kind of cold emailed them, and I think people like talking about things that they know a lot about, and maybe people don't ask them about their specialties a lot, so they were incredibly helpful, and I gave them a little shout out in the book's acknowledgments.
That was very kind of you. Well, you already had experience with that, having written your own book about 400 things cops should,
Yeah.
and people were happy to know that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So I described this book to people is more like Jack Reacher than Michael Conley. And in fact, it's not dissimilar in concept to The Killing Floor, which was Lee Child's first book, which he debuted right here in this bookstore all those years ago.
That's the nicest thing that anyone's ever said about me or my writing. It's high praise.
I didn't say the writing, I said the concept. Pay
I know, I kinda
attention.
took it a step
Right.
too far. Doggone it.
But in truth, Reacher gets on a bus. It's just Shane. I mean, it's the same deal if
Yeah.
any of you have ever seen the movie Shane. So Reacher arrives on a bus in a small town in Georgia, and senses somehow, even though he's not there for any particular reason, that was where he got off,
Hmm.
senses that something dark and probably bad is going on in this small town. And by the time he leaves, he's cleaned it up. And so basically, Fenton, Arizona is much, I can't remember the name of the town in Georgia, but
I think it
very
was Mangrove.
something like that.
Yeah, Mar- Margrave.
Why don't
Nicely
you
done
come
up
more
there.
often? It's usually, Patrick is the one who usually has to come out of the media room
Great
and tell me
resource
what it
here.
is. Yeah, he's a great resource, right? Margrave. Okay, so it is a lot like Margrave, Georgia, I think.
Yeah, I think this sort of that setting of a stranger coming into a town where there's sort of mysterious goings-ons is just that sort of has an irresistible pull to it, and I wanted to kind of lean into that.
Well, it's a classic Western, isn't it?
Yeah,
So why can't Kurt, retired Detroit cop, show up in a small Western town and pretend he's Shane?
that's kind of what's happening.
Okay, so what happens when he gets there?
So he's actually house sitting for a former Detroit SWAT buddy of his, but his friend is called to active duty, so Kurt kind of has a place to himself. And while he's there, he's approached by a woman with a small child, and this woman is searching for her husband who went missing in another small town about 30 miles away. And she's kind of heard about Kurt because he's gotten a little notoriety because of the events of what happened in the ascent. But as he's the first to say, he's no kind of investigator, so he just refers her to the local police. But when he ends up going to that next small town to see how she's doing, just check in, see if if she needs anything, he discovers that she and her son are now missing as well. So then he decides to stick around and start asking some questions, and some mayhem ensues from there.
Oh, definitely mayhem ensues. So, want to talk about Homeland Security? I mean, this is fiction, but the real thing is just as horrible. So, well, it is. Sorry. So, in your book, Homeland Security features.
Yeah, so Kurt realizes that this small town, Fenton, Arizona, has a fairly large police force, especially for a town of its size, and the force seems to be all sort of ex-military, and these folks are just wired tight. Weapons, gear, they all sort of move like career soldiers, not so much sort of local cops or deputies. So that strikes him as odd. And he's also approached by an agent from Homeland Security when he starts asking some questions, and she says, trying to appeal to his cop nature, that they're doing Homeland Security work there, and if he keeps asking questions, he's going to kind of rock the boat, and tells him sort of politely to buzz off. And if he did buzz off, then there'd be no more books. So
That's true. He would
is
never
buzzing
have
on? Is
cleaned
that
up
an expression?
Fenton,
Does he buzz
Arizona.
on?
No, he wouldn't have. Well, we can't go any further really with the plot without spoiling it for you. But I do think the presence of this, implausible number of ex-military and Homeland Security in this, what is like 2,000 or 4,000 people? I mean, it's really small.
Yeah, it's a small town.
Right. So clearly that's a signal, even if it weren't an ex-cop, even if it were just like me, I would think there's something going on here that doesn't appear on the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I went to look at the stats for sort of officers to compare to population, and I just kind of took that number and sort of doubled it. Thank you. So the cop has about 2 or 3 times as many cops as it needs. So that's what piques his curiosity.
So is that a cheat sheet that fell on the floor?
Oh no, this is just a few notes that I was going to deliver a few.
Excellent. Well, why don't you do that?
Well, I kind of have a good thing going here. I get to talk to this woman. I hope you know that this woman is a legend. I mean, this is.
I used to
this
be
is
a
good
lawyer.
stuff.
I had a lot of practice in doing all this before I became a bookseller. Right. Well, no, I mean, this is a difficult book because it will just spoil it if we say a whole lot more about what's happening. But since this is only your second book, here's something we can safely talk about. What inspired you to write fiction? You got your writing chops kind of going with nonfiction, but that's a really different process. Access is a different side of your brain. What interested you in writing The Ascent?
Well, I've always I'm a big fan of tough guys. I grew up reading Robert B. Parker Spencer.
See, I'm so old. I read him in real time. I can still remember. Oh, it's true. We have Tony Hillerman's daughter Anne coming with her 9th novel on Monday. I remember when Tony wrote The Blessing Way. I'm not quite back to the original Raymond Chandler, but I think I read Ross McDonald in real time.
Yeah.
Seriously. So it's a different experience when you talk about people. See, you think he's an icon because he's dead. And not more writing. But for me, Bob was some guy that used to sit here, and our discussion used to be, he's from Boston, I'm from Chicago. Which of our teams would win first? Would it be the Red Sox or would it be the Cubs? No. And when the Red Sox won, I've always loved this about Bob. He was so funny, and generally really, really wordy. But when the 7th game of the Red Sox game finished and they won, I trotted down to my office to the computer, and I wrote to Bob something like, yay, you did it, whatever. Bob Parker, this is the email he wrote back to me. Oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God, love Bob. I mean, this is a man who wrote whole novels. And this was his response to, but seriously, it was, he was really heavily invested in baseball. It was a lot of fun. But anyway, I digress, as I always do. So go back to...
So I grew up reading sort of tough guy books. I've always had a soft spot for those, and also sort of like the like Harlan Coben standalones, where sort of a suburban housewife turns into an intrepid investigator out of necessity because her husband disappears or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of take my shot at that. The Ascent was my first novel, but first published novel, but it wasn't my first novel. I had 5 previous novels that I wrote that are unpublished, and as I like to say, for the sake of readers everywhere, should really remain that way. But I think I had to write some sort of crappy novels to write one halfway decent one. But I've had the writing bug since I was a kid.
So, being a cop gave you material, didn't it?
It's pretty rich ground out there. I mean, I spend a lot of time around wanted felons, and they will say and do things that I will just remember, take, and just drop into a book, which sometimes feels a little bit like cheating, but I think that's just a perk of the profession, so I'm going to roll with it.
So fiction goes through cycles about what people want to read. And a long time ago, because I started this store in 1989, police procedurals were a big thing. LAPD, before Michael Connelly came along, there was a woman called Del Shannon who wrote wonderful and realistic, because the cops were always working more cases than they had time for. Mm-hmm. It was never like they just got to follow one case when you read her books, so they were great. But cop novels, as we called them, had a very large population of authors. And then somehow or other that moved on. The private eye novel has become less so, because private eyes aren't gumshoes anymore. They're mostly sitting around behind computers. If you watch Bosch, for example, his friend, with the ponytail, his name I can't remember. He has what's it called? Chang is his actor name or something. I love him. He's great.
You know everything.
You know everything, isn't it, Chang? I think.
Chang is the support. Titus Welliver is the main actor.
Right, but my point is, he's not out, walking the streets. He's not being a gumshoe. He's with his computer and doing all that. Mm-hmm. So that's where the podcaster thing has come along, is that they're kind of replacing private eyes as people who are doing sort of semi-pro investigations.
Yeah, they get out there.
So it's great to actually, even if he's retired, I think of these more as cop novels, even if this one's more like Reacher than Connelly.
Yeah, there was, what was the podcast? Serial that actually did that get a conviction overturned, or at least they took a second look at that case? Those
there have been a lot of them. Yeah. studies we had, and there's the whole Innocence Project thing.
Mhm.
We have an active chapter here in Arizona, and we hosted a really interesting. Christina, were you here for that when we had the Innocent Project, the guy that was released? No, it was really fascinating to see, how that worked.
Yeah.
So, anyway, you must
That's-
know a lot about the architecture of prisons in order to write the Ascent.
You know, as a cop, spent a fair amount of time in county jail because we take prisoners there and we interrogate them. But when a prisoner goes to state prison, the job of the police is pretty much over. So to research the Ascent, I actually sat down with a prison warden, Jim Latoile, who's actually a first-rate crime author. You should check his stuff out. And he was incredibly helpful. And then I took a tour of San Quentin, which, oh man,
It's really horrifying,
that
isn't
place
it?
has some atmosphere
I never
to
made it to Alcatraz, but I actually have taken a tour of San Quentin.
Yeah.
It's an awful place.
There's just something about that environment, sort of that, just get this sense of barely repressed anger, and there's metal and noise. And then there's also, I talked to a few inmates who, seemed generally remorseful for the crimes they'd committed. And one guy in particular, I remember, he was in prison for life for murder, and he said he names his murder victim every morning as sort of a way to honor them. So there I think still are some chances for redemption there. And that was, I don't know, I made me sort of thoughtful about such things.
Okay. So after you wrote The Ascent, we've already sort of talked about Hard Time. What are you working in now?
So I have a first-rate literary agent, and she, I just sort of sat in the corner and made sarcastic comments. She was out working and got another 2-book deal with my publisher for
wonderful.
2 more Kurt Argento books. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through a rough draft of book number 3. So yeah, you'll be seeing more of him. This is kind of my sweet spot. I'm not going to produce a, sort of swoony Victorian romance. I kind of write what I know. So
That Agatha word's going to haunt you. You're going to make sure it haunts you.
I just want to say swoony.
So, what many of you won't realize is that it takes a really long time for a first novel to make it into print. So generally, it's 2 years. I don't know how long yours was. But
Yeah, 2 years and change.
Right. So the industrious and savvy author uses that time to write a second book, because once you get on that track, they do ask you to write a book a year, and that's really hard to do, especially if you are, still working. So did you take advantage of that time to write Hardtown?
I tried to be, was it industrious and savvy?
That's what I said.
That's what I'm going for.
Mm.
Yeah, I did. It took a little over 2 years for the Ascent to sort of hit bookshelves. So I worked on Hardtown, and then while Hardtown's been kind of in the hopper, I've been working on book 3. So I don't think I can do a book a year, just because I am working full time, and I like to spend time with my wife and kiddos. But yeah, I'm just very grateful that I'm still able to write these books. There's a lot of talented writers that, especially in this market, are trying to get published, and so it's a really nice problem to have.
It is a nice problem to have, and as I previously mentioned, there aren't that many cops or ex-cops currently in place, so that's good news for you. When you wrote The Ascent, did you anticipate that you would write a sequel, that we would see Kurt again? Because that comes up a lot with first novels, is that sometimes they don't even think they're writing a mystery or a thriller.
Yeah.
We had an author here the other night who thought she was writing something totally different than it turned out to be.
Okay.
Did you always, and did you suspect that there would be a sequel, or was it kind of you just wanted to see if you could do it and get it published?
Yeah, because I had those sort of 5 failed novels, I didn't go into The Ascent thinking that this was going to be I didn't have sort of the confidence. I think this is going to be some sort of long-running series. So I thought, I'm happy I tricked some publisher into putting this out. I'm going to write the best book I can, and then, be happy with it. But some people said some nice things about it, and it kind of found a little foothold out in the world. So when they said you want to write number 2, I mean, that was an easy question because he's a
Okay,
character
so
I'm pretty fond of.
no, but the assumption was that you would bring him back, as opposed, or could you in fact have said, no, I don't want to write about Kurt already. It's one and done, and now I'm going to do something else.
I think one of the things I've kind of kicked around is writing sort of a straight up police procedural. I mean, that's the
I mean, with a not retired cop.
yeah, and the downside of that is, as a working cop, I have I think about police work all the time. I got police work sort of coming out of my ears, so I wanted to take a step back from that and write someone who was still in the police world but was retired, so I wasn't kind of married to the job because I don't necessarily want to think about work when I get home so much. So that was sort of a way of kind of threading the needle.
You have to be really careful too if you're writing police procedurals. You can't write about an open case. There is a very well-known author who I won't name the author, whose first book was such a success and desperation for a plot, actually took an open case and wrote about it, which ended up with the author and her publisher getting sued by the family of the victims. And so that's you could sort of find yourself close to the mark if you're writing a police novel with a serving policeman, if you're not really careful that you don't write something that might resemble an open case.
Yeah, well, with my first 2 books, which were nonfiction about law enforcement, I was very careful about not compromising any open cases, not embarrassing anyone other than myself. I'm happy to take some shots at myself, but I wanted to sort of do right by the job, and that's important. You want to guard people's privacy, and you don't want to interfere with the criminal justice system at all.
And you don't want to get sued.
Also that,
yeah.
Right.
So have you read about, it was either the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal last week, there's apparently a group of former policemen and so forth that have set themselves up as a resource for people writing fiction. I can't remember what their name is.
Yeah, I did see that. There is Cops and Writers.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you be interested in, well, you are a writer, so, but would that sort of thing be something of interest to you?
Yeah, if they give me a call, I'll pick up the phone. Yeah.
See, we're coming back to crowdsourcing. It's just almost inevitable. No, but I mean, I did think, apparently it was started by a former, maybe still, but anyway, a policeman who got tired of reading about all the mistakes that were made by authors writing about. That comes up with thrillers all the time, that there's a world of gun guys out there, and thriller writers are constantly just being drilled if they make a mistake, with weaponry. Now, when I read a thriller, I don't, have no idea whether the weaponry is accurate or not, but there are people who really care. And if you're writing a police procedural, there are a lot of people who apparently have nothing else to do but tear your novels apart, to check them for accuracy. So I guess this group is designed to try to overcome that if people consult them.
Yeah, you're right. There's a whole community out there where if you get sort of one thing wrong, they'll write the author personally. And I had an experience with that. In The Ascent, there's a character who has a plan to move to, I think it was Manitoba. I just needed kind of a cold place. So I put that in the book, and then talked about how they wanted to move to an inland lake and have a little cabin there. And it was, I didn't research it because I thought, I don't know.
It's like Iowa.
I'm not gonna, I mean, God bless Manitoba, but I'm not going to go there for the purposes of this book. And I got a long descriptive email from someone who lived in that area and said, no, there's no inland lakes here. They're all sort of artificially produced. And what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I could tell that you're passionate about this. I'll take that one.
Google Maps are a great thing, but I don't know. One of the things I've always enjoyed about the Da Vinci Code for people who knew Paris, I don't know if you know this, but when Dan Brown wasn't in Paris, when he wrote it, so he used Google Maps or whatever it is. or Google Earth. But anyway, it doesn't have 3 dimensions. So he would have some scenes in Paris where whatever they were looking at was completely blocked by, by a building.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, you could see around corners maybe, but you couldn't like see over the top of a 5-story building.
Yeah.
So you have to, even if you're consulting these handy new internet tools, you do have to be careful.
Yeah, and there was I was listening to an author being interviewed who had set his book in a small town, an actual town, and he got angry letter back from a reader who lived in that town because he had described a mailbox at a certain corner, but it was the wrong corner. I was like, no, that's not that mailbox is on the northwest corner, not the southeast. He says, come on. I mean, people really get into that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing you have, this came up the other night. Were you here when I started talking about phone numbers? Oh, well, one of the big problems that's currently plaguing authors is if you use a phone number in your book, it can be a real phone number. And I was thinking about that because Greg Hurwitz, who writes this wonderful series called Orphan
Oh,
X.
yeah.
Okay, so the deal in Orphan X is he's sort of like super black ops CIA guy who is trying to go straight. So he sets up an 800 number where people can call, and he'll answer and for help. And so Greg actually has an 800 number for Orphan X, and when you
yeah.
call it, the X answers the phone.
I have
mean,
called
that's his way to kind of get her. I'd love it to get
Yeah.
around that. And I had this weird experience years ago. I had a friend, an author in New Mexico, and I was reading along with one of her books, and there's some car abandoned by the road or in the desert or something, and so the cops read off the license plate where they go. And as I passed it by, I thought, that sounds so familiar. And then I realized, I went out in the garage, it's my license plate.
Oh, nice.
So I wrote to her, and she said, I didn't think you'd mind.
Oh, that's
But
cool.
so you do actually have to be careful in fiction. You don't want to kill somebody in a restaurant you actually want to eat in. You don't want
Yeah.
to, you have to think about phone numbers. That's why they're all disclaimers in books about how it's all fiction, because you can get sued or
Yeah.
just get angry letters from people.
And there's a section of Hardtown that takes place in Phoenix, and there's a couple spots where I describe really sort of crime-ridden, rundown neighborhoods, and I try to be sort of thoughtful about that. I didn't use actual street names; I just made up the streets because I thought, you know what, I don't want to trash someone's street. I'm sure there's good people that live there, and they don't want their street to be thought of in that way. So, it seemed like the right thing to do.
Did you master our area codes if you were making any phone calls?
Boy, I hope so. If I didn't, I bet you'll
That's
tell me.
another place you could trip up. That's why we have copy editors and proofreaders, to try to catch all those
Oh man,
stupid little things,
they
right?
make some serious saves, copy editors.
So you're really, what is the response of your fellow policemen to the fact that you're writing novels with a retired cop?
They've been pretty kind. I mean, cops being cops, they like to take opportunities to kind of give you the ribbing. The one feedback I've gotten is my author photo here, which is me against a brick wall. My wife took this picture because I don't have a big operation, but they look at that and they thought I was trying to kind of look a little too tough. So one of them actually said that it looked like I was experiencing bowel trouble. So I thought that was pretty good. But no, they've been pretty kind. I mean, I think it's the kind of book that your typical cop would like. And some of them have bought it and asked me to sign it, and I always get a big kick out of that.
So if some of them asked you if they could be characters in your book?
I have put some of my coworkers' names in the book. They didn't ask, I just did it. I thought they'd get a kick out of it.
Wow, there could be a hit on him at any moment.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's the thing that authors often do for charity is they put up in fact, we've had several of those auctions here at the store where people will pay money to be a character in a book.
Yeah, it's
and
cool.
then most of the time, you don't get to choose whether you're going to be the good guy or the bad guy or the victim when that happens. But it's been a serious fundraiser for various charities. But I would think, in your case, it might just be people who think it would be cool to appear, if they're working with you, to appear in one of your books.
Yeah, they
Have they objected?
no, they've all gotten kind of a kick out of it.
Well, you're lucky.
So far.
How about questions from the audience? What would you all like to ask? You talk to me about. You bought your book somewhere else. You have to pay. So tell us about your 400 whatever.
What's up, Steve?
See how guilty he looks. I was directing him towards the table so he could buy a book, and he had to admit that he'd already bought it somewhere else.
He's a good man.
One easy question.
That's
Where in San Francisco did you patrol, and how do you fit writing in your full-time job?
yeah. So I had until this past week patrolled the Mission District of San Francisco. So it's a fascinating part of the city. Very high volume of calls for service. Interesting neighborhoods. You meet a lot of interesting people. But I worked with great cops, so it was a good experience. And in terms of writing, I kind of just take my laptop everywhere I go. So if I'm waiting to pick up my daughters from soccer practice, I'll just try to pound out half a chapter here or there. I don't have any kind of master process. I don't get up at the same time of day every morning. I just kind of whenever I can.
Where do you get your inspiration for your characters?
So Kurt Argento, the main character in the book, is sort of a compilation of a lot of cops I know. A little bit of me in there too, but he's arguably better at fighting than me, which is a admission I make somewhat grudgingly. But yeah, there's so many characters on the job. I was a cop in Milwaukee before I was a cop in San Francisco. So you take people's kind of interesting traits, and the magic of fiction is you can just slap it all together and try to create a compelling character. So yeah, little pieces of a lot of folks in him. Hey, Christina, how are you?
Thanks for admitting you had 5 unpublished novels.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta know.
They're terrible.
And I always love to ask this question because the answers are varied. What kept you writing? Like, why did you not give up?
I think it was just kind of old mule stubbornness. And part of it too was in my first attempts at fiction, I think they were just sort of pale imitations of authors that I really admired. So it'd be sort of a poor man's Robert B. Parker or James Lee Burke. And I'm not Robert B. Parker, and I'm not James Lee Burke. So it kind of took me a while to, I think, find my own voice. But yeah, I think, they say the definition of insanity is just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But if you want to get a novel published or a book published, you got to be a little bit crazy. And so I think that's what I did. Yeah.
So if you said you've always been a writer, what made you then go into law enforcement?
You know what? It seemed like a noble calling. I think if you do the job right, it is. I was an English major in college, so I thought that police work would be where some good stories can be found, and I think I was right about that. Yeah, I just wanted to do something sort of service-oriented, something that was a little different from day to day, and the idea of chasing wanted felons and kicking in a door here and there, that kind of appealed to me too. So it seemed like the complete package. Yeah.
So Christina is a published author, and we are going to be launching her second book on August 18th. I
Yeah.
already know that, right?
Nicely done.
So I even know what day of the week it is. Monday, August 18th, right. Right, so Christina has been an NPR reporter here for many years. Do you know that I meant to tell you that KJS has started a book club with us? And they have 25 people coming on Monday for the KJCC book club, which I think is really going to be fun. And then they're going to come back 3 or 4 weeks later and talk about the book. They're going to come to the event, get the book, and then they're going to go home and read it. And then they're going to come back and... Well, I can suggest it to them. I know. I think it's a wonderful idea. We could do that. Right. So, anybody else have a question? You ladies are all looking very... No, you're going to be too embarrassed, right?
I have a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Do you have a job, writer versus cop, that you prefer one over the other?
Hmm.
same time?
You know, as a cop, some days are better than others. I'm I'm 51 now, coming up on 52. So if I've just had to wrestle with a wanted felon half my age in a sort of a godforsaken alley, and you get a little beat up after that, you know, I sometimes lose a little bit of my enthusiasm for police work. But I still, I think, have a fair amount of gas left in the tank, and I think, you know, my writing informs my police work, and I think, especially the first two books that I wrote, the nonfiction books, being sort of thoughtful about policing made me a better cop. So I think they kind of feed into each other, and I like that.
If you're coming off patrol and going into investigative work, it might not be physically so challenging.
No, but the nice thing is when you're investigating internet crimes against children, it's typically a series of search warrants that end with you serving a search warrant at someone's house. So you're kicking indoors and trying to get the right people for the right crimes, and there's a lot of satisfaction to be had in that.
Yes, one more, because he brought it up. Sure. So you mentioned your writing informs your police work. So how has it helped you be a better cop?
You know, I think, especially with the nonfiction books that I wrote, you know, I'd be thinking about if I'm writing about something like interrogations or surveillance techniques, or, you know, working with vulnerable populations. You know, you think about, well, what are best practices for this? And you start talking to other people who know more than you, which is something I did with my second book. I interviewed subject matter experts and everything from the bomb squad to homicide to CSI. And there's just, you know, when you work in a big department, there's all these sort of specialty units that you don't always interact with a lot. And I learned a lot, a surprising amount about the job that I didn't know before. And I just took all that and just kind of applied it on the street. So it was kind of a win-win. Yeah.
So we kind of covered some of your cheat notes here, but I stole them.
I think I made some jokes about firefighters in there. I can't,
Well,
we have a natural
I thought you might
rivalry.
want to talk about, you just already mentioned it here, this second paragraph at the bottom here, I think is pretty cool there.
Oh, the one about the last fight I was in?
Yeah.
So, as I had mentioned, I'm maybe a little past my athletic prime, but you know, I write about there's a fair amount of violence and mayhem in these books, but and I had mentioned that Argento is probably a little better at fighting than me. The last decent scuffle I was in at work, I was on foot patrol and looking to arrest a guy in a drug offense, and he was probably about 20 years younger than me, and he didn't want to go to jail. So the scuffle was on, and I sprayed him with pepper spray. But I got enough blowback pepper spray in my own face that it caused me excruciating pain. So, you know, actual fights there's nothing choreographed about them. There's nothing Hollywood-esque about them. They're sort of awkward and sloppy, and, you know, I'm just a middle-aged man doing his middle-aged best. So I just wanted to say that.
But when you write scenes like that in your books, you know, you have to choreograph them. Are you a visual writer? Do you actually see, you know, the fight scene, so to speak, or how do you manage that? Because
Yeah,
it is choreography.
Yeah, I try to just kind of run the scene through my head so I don't have a character doing something that's sort of physically impossible. I mean, if both of his hands are occupied, then he can't throw a punch or fire a gun. Greg Hurwitz, who you mentioned, is I think, master of choreographed fight scenes. I mean, he'll have a fight scene go on for multiple pages, and it's just mesmerizing. I mean, that guy's got a gift. He's also diabolical. I mean, he comes up with these bad guys that do these ingenious, horrific things, and I'm just glad he's one of the good guys.
Yeah, but you also have to imagine the space. You know, where's the fight taking place? You know, is it a confined place, or is it, you know, wide open? Can other people come into the arena?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be just you two people? Or is Buddy's going to get into the act? Where are the weapons? I mean, there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, and one of the things that I try to do is, I mean, Kurt Argento is a tough guy, but he's not a walk into a bar and beat up 3 people without getting a scratch on him and then smoking a cigarette afterwards. He's more of a walk into a bar and maybe beat up 2 people, but he has to use a bar stool to do it, and then he gets a concussion at the end. I mean, I try to thread in some authenticity because, you get punched one time and a fight can be over. I'm always reminded of the old Westerns where they punch each other in the face about 20 times and then they just kind of stagger around and then they were fine. That's
Or
not
they
how it
each
works.
get off like 13 shots, but neither hits anything.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
or they shoot 40 times and no one reloads. You got to
I
pay
know.
attention to that stuff.
You do. Patrick, you have some questions from online because I see you over there.
Yeah, and we don't hear about the medical leave after, right? Where you're
Oh, right.
off work for like a week
Yeah, or the
recovering.
someone has to fill out the disability paperwork and they never talk about that.
Yeah, a couple of questions here. One is just why is the cop in the book from Detroit?
Aha. That's a good question. So I grew up in Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. So, the Detroit Pistons, the Detroit Lions, they're my team. So I'm a Michigan guy, and I wanted to give them a little shout out to the home state. So that's and also Kurt Argento. I wanted to be a genuinely sort of tough piece of meat. And when I thought of sort of tough cities to police, Detroit was one of the ones that came to mind. So that's why I did that.
It's kind of a random question. Do you know how to pick locks?
Oh, it's as cops we don't pick locks a lot. If we encounter a locked door,
The door into
if it's an interior door, usually you can get it in about 1 to 2 kicks. Exterior doors, we either use a ram or sometimes we have to swallow our pride and call the glory boys from the fire department to help us get in. But yeah, I mean, I know that I remember reading a lot of books about private investigators that use like lock picking tools and things like that.
There's a real art to it. Remember Joe Gore's?
I do remember
Yeah,
Joe
there-
Gore's, but Steve Hamilton, remember when his second
Yeah.
or third Edgar, the entire book was about a locksmith.
Okay.
Yeah, he was, it was what's it called? It's even called The
I think it was
Locksmith.
called The Lock Artist.
The Lock Artist,
Yeah.
right.
Nice.
Really terrific book.
Well, we romanticized that era when it was like the gangster era where, yeah, I know this grid safe guy, or I know
Right,
a
yeah.
guy who, who had this really specialized kind of skill. Let's see. Okay, ask him if he has plans to kill off a character based on a bad boss, she says.
So if your captain
or
is
is
a
there,
bad guy,
I think she just means, is it a good opportunity to have some fun vengeance on
Oh.
people that have rubbed you the wrong way?
I like everybody. I have some author friends that have run afoul of some folks, and they're like, I'm going to put that person in my book, and they're going to die horribly, some exotic poison. I haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'll keep an open mind.
All right. Do you have a dog?
I do. I have, we have a Chow Chow. His name is Ziggy, and he's sort of the basis for Argento's book Hudson in the Ascent in Hardtown. And he was a pandemic puppy. I didn't grow up with dogs, but I've become a dog lover. And it took a little work to write about the relationship between Argento and his dog, but I mean, they're like part of the family.
What else can we ask here? I know there are a couple people that are aspiring writers, and how did you get an agent, sell your first book? How did you go from being a working cop to also being a published author?
So for my first book, the nonfiction book, 400 Things Cops Know, I reached out to 90 different literary agents, all of whom took a pass. They weren't nearly as impressed with me as I was, which was always a bummer. The 91st agent I signed with, but we couldn't quite make a deal happen, so I actually went to a small independent publisher for my first book to get that published. I mean, even in this landscape, even getting an agent is a significant feat because they don't get paid unless they sell your book. So the good news is it just takes sort of one good match, even if you get a lot of futility. If you're a starting author, I think you're going to have to expect that you're going to be knocking on some doors and they're not going to open. And it's just a question of, are you going to just keep knocking or are you going to quit?
Well, but the good news is there are more and more small publishers coming up since the field is sort of like a forest fire, when it burns, there's now room for new growth under the trees that went down, and that's with only 5 major publishers now. That means that there's lots more opportunity with the air cleared to get new ones, and distribution is easier. So I think there's many more opportunities to be published, not necessarily well, but to be published.
Yeah, that's great.
It is. No, I think it's a hopeful time in that sense.
That's all I got.
That it? Oh, you got. Okay. I love it when people who are watching it, come in and ask. No Stefania tonight? Is she not up
Yeah,
till?
she
We have an
must actually be sleeping.
Italian fan who must be. It's like 3 or 4 in the morning, and
Oh, in Italy.
yeah, no,
Nice.
she's in Italy. She's often with us, right? They come from all over, Iceland, New Zealand, whatever. I think that's the thing about streaming is that you can reach anywhere. So it averages about 1,000 people actually watching it over the next day or two, which I find really fascinating. But yeah,
Did your reading of these hard-boiled detectives and cops influence your cop work?
Oh,
or why did he go from Detroit to San Francisco? Another question.
not. I don't think my actual cop work because, first of all, if when you're an actual cop, you can't really say some of the things that you want to say. If there's like a really kind of tough or cool line, like it's not really professional to say it, and also you never really think about it until way after the fact. But I think if there is a takeaway there, some of the fictional detectives, just their relentlessness. I sort of admire that, and I've tried to do that in my police work. Just kind of straight ahead and doing the job and putting the hours in. So, yeah, in a sense, I think so.
So what video or film news might you have for us?
Oh, well, the Ascent was optioned by Universal for television, which is kind of a fun thing to say. There hasn't been any specific news on that yet because I think the wheels of Hollywood move kind of slowly. But the best part about it, other than they actually pay you for the option for not doing anything, which is, I think that's kind of the American dream, is that for about 48 hours, my daughters thought I was kind of cool. Because they think, they hear Universal, and they think Universal Studios, right? So then they thought, okay, the Ascent, it could be a ride at Universal. And then not just any ride, but the best ride. So that's what they're holding out for.
Well, thank you all. You've been a very attentive audience, so thank you so much for coming tonight. Virtual audience, thank you for joining us and for your participation. Let's give Adam a round of applause.
Thank you so much, folks. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. So, is there anybody here who has not bought a copy of Hardtop? Well, no, I wasn't urging you to do it. I was going to give away my copy. However, if you'd like to buy one, that would be outstanding. How about all of you? Would one of you like to have a book? Will you share it? Okay. You should get him to autograph it then, okay? All right. So Adam can stay here. I'll go get a Sharpie, and he can sign your